Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. Let's really look at this archetype. So when we look at Mercury in general, it's the function of communication, it's the function of thought. And one of the things that we learn with Mercury is that life never calls itself by any particular names. So we call this a tree, guitar, camera, body, stars. Then we classify the stars and we say, all right, this group of stars is this group, this constellation. Maybe in a different culture, they'll look at the sky and they'll create different groupings. Or you might look at the body and say, okay, here is an allopathic system for understanding anatomy and physiology and human health. And you go to a different culture, you'll have a Taoist system or an Ayurvedic system. So Mercury is where we're taking life in its fullness, what it is, but so that we can relate to it. We can talk about it, kind of dissect it, understand the interconnectedness of all of oneness with itself, and be able to relate it to one another. We're going to be creating names and classifications. And it's fascinating because in every culture, wherever you go, we're going to have different ways of looking, different ways of organizing reality in our minds. And this is why Mercury is an air archetype. It corresponds to Gemini. Air is communication. Air is relational. Air is interconnected. So what happens with the Mercury archetype is because we have individualities, every soul, every individual being of a unique essence, a unique expression of divine intelligence, everyone's going to be looking at reality, and according to their own soul directive, why they're here, each soul is going to be naturally drawn to think of things in a certain way. We're going to look out at life and we're going to classify it differently. We're going to think of different classifications. We're going to organize it in our mind, and we're going to be drawn to look at certain parts of it. I mean, just like the scene that you're looking at right now, we got my words, we got my facial expressions, my body, the scene behind me. And if you wanted to study any one of those things, you can go deep and deep and deep. You can correspond psychology and different emotional states with my facial expressions and all the different things that are coming out of my expressions. And you can just dissect and dissect. And also, Mercury does correspond to Virgo as well. So we can take apart everything and look at all the different facets. Just analyze minutia details. And so then being an air quality, connective, social, it creates this interesting web of growth and discovery, because I'm gonna have to find a way to communicate to you. You don't see the way I see, and I don't see the way you see. So in virtue of that, all the different orientations, all the different ways of thinking and looking at life, and all the different ways that we're uniquely interested to investigate certain things further, this is going to expand our consciousness, all of our consciousness. And there's something so interesting about Mercury. I'm a musician, so we can think of music, and I get tripped out when I think about this. We have an E note. We call it an E note, and that's just like a certain resonance, right? And there are other people that call E note something else even. But just listen to the tone. Now, I'm gonna make an E note with my voice. Dum, dum, dum. They're both E notes. And they have, an oscillation and all that kind of stuff, but you can tell that one is coming from my voice, the other's coming from a string. And they are like when I listen to music, it just blows me away, because I'll hear these notes and these chords and these harmonies being played, but they're coming from almost like an infinite array of sources. Just look at one culture, any culture in the world, their instruments, their tones, and how they use their voice. There's a Saturday Night Live actor, I forgot his name. Yeah, maybe I'll post it. He's a great study in Mercury. He's pretty much an expert in accents. So you can like pick a state, and not just a state, like a state in the United States, like Texas, but like don't just pick Texas, pick like Corpus Christi or Houston or Austin, and he'll be able to replicate the unique way that people talk in each of those places. And so there's a unique way of communicating, of expressing. It's like, a word isn't a word. You can say everything in such a nuanced diversity forms of expression. It's amazing. So that's Mercury in general. And when Mercury goes retrograde, I feel I've probably written about this a lot, but I don't know how much I've spoken about this in video. Anything retrograde invites us to internalize, reflect, and sort of step away from the conditioned patterns that we're used to relative to that planetary function. So if Mercury is how we classify things in our mind, Mercury retrograde says, let go of the stronghold. Create more space, more spaciousness for new streams of thought, new streams of communication, new possibilities, new perspectives to come through. And so the things that maybe that we are used to, and the mediums and the technologies that maybe we're used to working in a certain way, which then corresponds to how we're communicating, how we're transmitting information, phone, computer, internet. It may not be what we expect. Certain communications or agreements with other people, there's just a different flow for it. And it never means that it's not a time to make agreements or whatever. But there is an amazing invitation during the Mercury retrograde period to slow the mind down, to become more mindful of how we are so often operating from a route, conditioned state of looking at the world the way we are used to looking at the world, and creating thoughts that we are used to creating as if those thoughts determined what things actually are. In the same way that there's no one way to sing a song, there's no one way to look at life, and thus your life and your plans and what you think is going on, many different perspectives. This Mercury retrograde in Scorpio is a really potent one, and I'm excited to speak about the energy of the Scorpio. One possibility during this time for us, one invitation, one area of growth, is to look at the suffering that we create for our own selves when we become attached to outcome. The teaching in Scorpio is our suffering, our pain, our turmoil really arises from concern with gain or loss. You can think of this in any area of life. Whenever we move towards relationship or a project or anything in our life, from this inner stance of, I'm afraid to lose something, or I need to gain something that I otherwise don't have and believe I need. Whenever we orient in that way, our energy is not centered in the present moment. And there's an entanglement that's created where we're needing life to show up and sort of move in a certain way. It really does set ourselves up in some way for disempowerment, because we become hooked on life responding in the way that we need it to feel whole. So then Mercury retrograde, we're needing other people to think or communicate or respond or address things. Otherwise, we're going to feel a sense of loss within ourselves. We're going to be losing or not getting the power that we otherwise need. Our energy center will be kind of like tentacles waiting for the external environment to respond in the way that we're needing. Like a great example of this would be, you go on a date and you had a great time and you text the person you went on a date with and they don't respond. Right there. That's an example of there's an energetic cord moving out, needing something back. And this is not a bad thing, right? We all create attachments, and if we stay there, if we don't look at it and see, okay, how can I move with this energy and make conscious choices, we can build resentment, all right? So you sent that text, they're not responding, and that can harbor a psychology of victimization and resentment. And then the Mercury retrograde in Scorpio can become very dark. Ways that we use speech, ways that we communicate, ways that we express ourselves to convey ideas that are actually conscious or subconscious ways of gaining our power back. So, Mercury in Scorpio can really use the words to kind of stab at the weakest psychological place within someone, to know exactly what to say to hurt someone. And thus, bridges can be burned and a lot of hurt can be created. Or you notice, oh wow, it really hurts when I put out this energy and they're not responding. Let me feel that, okay, it hurts. I'm wanting something from them. So how can I consciously, in my power, make choices that allows me to honor what I'm feeling, honor what I'm experiencing, but to poise myself in a way where no matter what happens out there, I'm gonna be here. I'm gonna be safe and secure and good right here. It doesn't mean, well, forget them, because that's another form of entanglement. When we do that, we're actually closing our heart, and it's a sort of an entitled way of claiming our power back. And it doesn't usually bring us true peace. And it usually leaves unresolved karma. It might be communicating your truth, speaking authentically, inviting Scorpio and Mercury and Scorpio, deep, authentic, real communication. I notice that I'm uncertain about what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and I have a lot of thoughts, and I wanted to just really check in. Where are you at? What are your needs? What are your expectations? That's one of many ways of responding. The other would be to do nothing. Be like, you know what? I don't know what's going on with them. It's all good. Because what comes will come, and what goes will go. The invitation to explore doing nothing is like, it's deeper than we realize. I am constantly finding on my own journey that most of my actions, very, very often, if they're stressful, are deriving from this concern with outcome. I'm like, I need to do this, otherwise I will lose this, or otherwise I'll miss this. Or conditionalities within relationship. To be loved, to be wanted, I need to do this. And just to really reflect upon ourselves, how much of our mental energy is leaving the center, leaving our sovereign center, and going out into the world around us to kind of like pry into, like, what do I have to say? What do I have to do? What are the right thoughts? It's almost like we're subconsciously, on a subtle level, playing this game, this power game with life. And so this exploration of what does it look like to do nothing, right? There's something so powerful in that place. The resistance to that is, if I do nothing, nothing will happen. What if I lose them? And this is what I want to offer here. Doing nothing doesn't mean a continual state of stasis and non-activity, but it's creating space inside of ourselves where our perceptions can drop and sort of depart from this really deep investment with external reality, and to come back to a fundamental truth, which is, well, everything will come and go. Maybe we'll get married and have kids and whatever. Maybe we're not going to go on another date. Who knows? Like, everything is going to come and go. This lifetime is very short. And to drop back into that sense, and we all come to that in our own ways. We may not think of it in terms of, I'm going to die one day, it's all temporary. We might just have this experience of, right now, I'm okay. Things are okay right now. When I pick up this thought and I get invested and concerned, and I think there's something to resolve, then that okayness seems to kind of go away. But in silence and stillness, we all naturally return back to this fundamental okayness, this fundamental truth. And the way we know we're there is when we start to feel our power again. A power that can't be taken. It's a power that's in the center of all change. And we remember, oh, when my identity is directed towards outcome, when I become entangled and identified with what happens or doesn't happen, I can't feel my power. I can't be in my sovereign being. And thus, I really can't see anything clearly. It's impossible to see anything or anyone clearly for what it is, because our Mercury unique forms of perceiving are going to be completely conditioned by whatever psychological dynamics we're seeking to resolve. And so it's always going to be about needing to make life the way we need it to be so that we can feel good about ourselves again. And it's sort of a crapshoot, because life might, especially during a Mercury retrograde cycle, there's like an accelerated growth opportunity, in this case, to really go inside, to really look at ourselves. So just dropping in that stillness, I find the first step is stopping. To notice where there's the impulse to act upon the emotions and to engage more thought, to engage more mind. But when we just don't act, we're left with sensation. And Scorpio can do that. We can go deep. We can drop in and just let it be. When we experience the raw sensation of our life, we actually realize pretty directly that this has nothing to do with the characters in our life. They're sort of just space holders. But the sensation, it's just energy, and it's so much deeper. It's so personal to our own self. And as we just come into a quieter space, we can take responsibility, and we realize that this is our own pattern of sourcing our wholeness outside of ourselves. And because our inner reality is the program, is the source of outer reality, there's no separation. There's a deep healing and a deep revelation that occurs when we drop the compulsive investment with the outer. And we just give entire attention to coming back to our wholeness. And again, it doesn't mean we're not going to do something. It means the next choice we make will come from a different vantage point. And if you look at my earlier series on Mars and choice, I offer this perspective that when we make choices, it's actually more of a noticing from a stillness, from a quiet, what wants to happen. And then we choose in respect to that. But the choosing really, it follows a noticing. And when we are not grabbing, we can notice something far simpler. And in our quiet, what we notice actually resonates with the flow of the universe. We realize, oh yeah, all these things that are happening, all these characters and players and dynamics in my life are really one with my own unraveling. And when I'm not seeing it as a struggle, I get to join the dance, and I could choose from a clear place. Now I'll share one more thing. We have a really interesting phenomena occurring during this Mercury retrograde cycle. And that is Mercury is going to be conjunct its south node and its north node while it's on the sun, which is always when that happens, which is also the midpoint of this Mercury retrograde cycle. But it's a very healing and cleansing energy. Whenever a planet is on its south node, it's a very cleansing and perhaps past karmic dynamics coming up to be released. And when it's on its north node, we have a similar dynamic where there's an accelerated evolutionary growth where we can really grow in that area. This is sort of like the energy of Mercury eclipsing the sun. That's the astronomy of it. Is if you have the right telescope, you can see Mercury like a little speck crossing over the sun. This happens very rarely. This also happens with Venus, also pretty rarely. So This will happen on the 11th at 18 degrees Scorpio. So check out what planets you have around there. Planets around 18 degrees and any of the other signs, it will be aspecting this Mercury. And I feel that whatever psychological content is that we're working with right now, like whatever's, currently manifesting, there's a great opportunity to get to a deeper source of our own power, a deeper self-knowledge, a deeper quiet and sovereignty. And it can bring a lot of dynamics, a lot of communication dynamics, a lot of changes in how we're relating and the dynamics of the people around us. So let's just see how this unfolds and where we find ourselves. Where is 18 degrees Scorpio in your chart? And where is your own Pluto? Lastly, we have, Pluto is a ruler of this, and we have Mars squaring Pluto. We have Saturn moving towards, like, Pluto's super duper activated. So it's a very empowering, very charged time.